Drug companies are being sued by patients who took medications containing valsartan. Instead of helping to control high blood pressure, the drugs actually cause many of them to develop cancer. Madeline Penley, attorney Madeline Penley, is here to join me now to talk about this. Maddie, first of all, what's the underlying problem here?
So the underlying problem is valsartan, which is a generic drug. It was pulled from the market because it was contaminated with a highly carcinogenic compound known as NDMA.
NDMA, people are going to start hearing more and more about NDMA because and now we learn that it's in so many different medications.
Right.
Tell me a little bit about it.
So NDMA, it's extremely dangerous. So the only reason it's even used today is in laboratory studies. So they actually inject animals with NDMA in order to see how tumors develop. So there's no question it's carcinogenic, and it's actually extremely good at facilitating tumor development. Anywhere it's injected will develop a tumor.
Okay, so the whole purpose, the only purpose that we use it for on the market in the United States is to cause cancer in laboratory animals.
Exactly.
And with valsartan, we know that it's in valsartan. It's being created, produced inside the medication itself. And so what went wrong? What happened here? Was it contamination of some kind or what?
It's basically a manufacturing defect, and this happened, long story short, because these companies cared more about making money than making a drug that was safe. So we have two main groups of defendants, to keep it simple. API manufacturers, they make the active pharmaceutical ingredient, valsartan, and finished dose manufacturers who bought that product. Basically, our main API manufacturer is a Chinese manufacturer called ZHP. ZHP had been making valsartan for years with no issue at all, and that's important. But in order to save money, they decided to change the manufacturing process, switch from process 1 to process 2. When they did that, they used cheaper materials. They can make more drugs more quickly. So it's just to make money, and that process too is what facilitated NDMA in the drug.
So you're suing these Chinese companies in the United States.
Yes.
And you're going to be able to hold them accountable with that case.
Yes, and we have a ton of internal documents, things they were saying to each other when they thought nobody was looking. Test results they had early on that shows that they did know about this issue and just didn't tell anybody.
Well, okay, so this Chinese company knows they're shipping tons of this stuff to the United States and all around the world for that matter.
Right.
They already know it's contaminated.
Yes.
There's not any question, yeah, we know it's contaminated. They're trying to say to the world public, don't worry about it, it's not enough. You're going to be okay. That is the biggest lie they could possibly tell, isn't it?
Right, and they knew it was contaminated, and they actually had testing results that show things that they were referring to as ghost peaks. So this is probably grossly oversimplified, but they have chromatography testing. It's like shows little bumps. And so they know where these bumps should be in baseline clean valsartan.
Yeah.
They did testing after the process 2 switch and saw these huge peaks.
And you've seen them.
I've seen them, and the emails discussing them, like, what is in this drug? This is so strange. And instead of looking into it and doing the testing they're supposed to do, they chalked it up to ghost peaks. It's a weird testing error, and continued to sell it.
Well, okay, there again, the FDA, of course, to me, is one of the laziest institutions we have in the United States.
Right.
They're either owned by corporate America. Corporate America, time and time again, the drug companies just do whatever they want to do with the FDA. The FDA didn't do much here, did they?
No, they didn't.
Yeah.
They actually approved this process switch for ZHP because ZHP told them it was a minor change, so that they didn't have to go through the more stringent regulatory requirements, and the FDA just kind of took them at their word and let them do it.
Okay, tell us how this NDMA operates. I mean, first of all, it's a carcinogen by itself.
Right.
But then when a person takes this valsartan, the NDMA is moving through their system, but they're also doing things like eating bacon, which is huge, eating smoked fish. Explain that a little bit.
So NDMA, is in this drug anyway, like you said, but if people are on a high nitrate diet, if the drug is exposed to heat and humidity, whether it's inside the body or out, all of those things can lead to higher levels of NDMA in the drug.
Any question that this Chinese company knew that? In your mind?
No, I mean, to be fair, at the beginning, they didn't know it was NDMA because they didn't want to know it was NDMA.
They were hiding.
But as soon as somebody raised the flag, they knew and kept their mouth shut.
Yeah. Thank you for joining me. Good luck on this case. It's an important one.
Thank you.
Political donors have decided to stop giving money to Washington politicians after last week's events, and they can thank that in their mind, if you really look at this, they know they get people elected, right? They know they get people elected, so they're going to drive the money. What bothered me about this story, it was just so ridiculous. It was almost dark comedy. When you have people like Jamie Dimon and Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley and all of these folks saying, "Oh my God, you have violated the rule of law in America, and so we're not going to give you any more money, Democrat or Republican." Can you imagine these cats that have been hit with virtually every major fraud felony known to mankind decade after decade, talking about the need for rule of law? It's embarrassing. Goldman Sachs should be embarrassed to even use words like that.
They really should. I mean, these are people and institutions that have absolutely been run through the ringer by the DOJ. A lot of them would be in prison if we actually prosecuted white-collar crime in the U.S. And to me, the other thing that stands out so strongly about this is that they understand their power. They know how much influence they wield over Washington, D.C. to be able to come out and make this joint kind of statement and say, listen, you get nothing from us until you get along. You don't get your allowance until you guys can get along anymore. And they know that that's going to work because these disgusting politicians are going to say, well, I can't fight him anymore because I have to have my Goldman Sachs money because I got an election in 2 years.
Well, it's the same thing they say to them behind closed doors. Here we're saying we're not going to, but most of the time it's AT&T or Bank of America or Exxon saying, we're not going to give you any money unless you do this for us. Yeah. It's just such an ugly story. And you want to say, people who read it say, oh, well, good for them, if they don't know the rest of the story. Yeah. The rest of the story, this is a cabal of gangsters.
Yeah, it really
and
is.
This cabal of gangsters are now saying, well, we're just going to dry up all the political money. It's really rich comedy if you think about it.
Well, and they've been fine going along for the ride with environmental destruction, with our endless wars in the Middle East. We're killing civilians left and right overseas. They're totally fine with that, but at least now we know, okay, there's a line, and that line is apparently armed insurrection in the Capitol. Anything short of that, they're totally okay with the U.S. doing.
They could do it surgically. We're going to go after the 8 senators, for example, who didn't want to certify the election. It doesn't have this broad, ridiculous statement coming from a gaggle of thugs. That to me, I read this story, I go, really? Let me run through this again.